Hello everyone, you guys asked for a table video and here it is. Yes, tables like this one are difficult to report because there is a lot of data. Let's look at the question first. The table below gives information about the underground railway systems in 6 cities. First of all, let's talk about how to group data into paragraphs. For this table, there are 2 ways. We can talk about date opened in details paragraph 1, kilometers of route in details paragraph 2, and passengers per year in details paragraph 3. Or we can group data by city and talk about the 3 oldest systems in details paragraph 1 and the other 3 in details paragraph 2. Both are correct, but which way is better? To answer this question, I would think of the purpose of the table. What does this table want us to compare? Obviously, the table wants us to compare the underground railway systems in 6 different cities. So I believe it's better to group data by city and not by date, length, and passenger count. Now let's start writing details paragraph 1. Let's start with London. Remember, we are asked to report the important features. That is to say, we are asked to do more than just report the data. We need to interpret them and say what is interesting about them. I think what's interesting about London's system is that it's the oldest and has the longest route. Wow, it's already had a railway system back in 1863. Opening in 1863 and covering 394 kilometers. London's is the oldest and the longest of the systems in the 6 cities. For less important data, there are 2 ways to deal with it. We can omit it, or we can report it less precisely. I will simply omit London's passenger numbers. I will show you how to report data less precisely when we describe Paris and Tokyo. So for Paris and Tokyo, I will group them together to report. It's very important to group some categories together when there is a lot of data. If you report every single city one by one, I guarantee you that you will soon run out of vocabulary and grammar constructions. I mean, how are you able to say the same thing in 6 different ways? So when can we group some categories together? Normally, I would group some categories together if they shared some similarities. As you can see, these 2 cities have similar kilometers of route and also have similar passenger numbers. So it's a good idea to group them together to show their similarities. Now ask yourself, what is so interesting about Paris and Tokyo? I think the most interesting fact about these 2 cities is that they have short routes but the largest passenger numbers. Since these 2 numbers are the largest, I will give them a precise report. Routes are less important, so we don't need to report them that precisely. We can just give a rough number. We can say something like they are less than 200 kilometers long. I don't think their opening dates are that important, but I don't want to omit too many numbers, and there is really no good way to give a rough number here. It would be inaccurate to say that they opened in the early 20th century. This is because, for many people, 1927 seems rather late to be called early. The early 20th century was marked by the First World War with all the changes that brought. The war ended in 1918. It sounds rather odd to many people to link anything that happened after 1918 with the beginning of the century. It's a little complicated. I hope I didn't confuse you. So there is no way to give a rough number here. And between omitting these 2 numbers and reporting them, I choose to report them. I don't want to omit 2 numbers at once. Railway systems opened in Paris in 1900 and Tokyo in 1927. Now, I will give a rough number for their routes. Even though they are less than 200 kilometers long, be careful that you need to use less with measurements, not fewer than 200 kilometers long. Next, I will report passenger numbers precisely. They have the largest annual passenger numbers at 1,927 million for Tokyo and 1,191 million for Paris. Please note that 2 numbers can be the largest at the same time. This is like saying that New York City and San Francisco are the two most expensive cities in the US, but we can omit two and just say they are the most expensive cities. I used to not know this. In the past, I would have written Tokyo system has the largest yearly passenger numbers and Paris has the second largest. You compare them. How clever this version is. We simply say they both are the largest without telling which one is the largest and which one is the second largest. I think this sentence is a very good comparison of Tokyo and Paris. This paragraph is done. So far we've focused on how to group data, how to select data, and how to deal with less important data. Next, when we describe the remaining 3 cities, I will be focusing more on how to vary our language. I mentioned earlier in the video that we can group together 2 categories if they share some similarities. As you can see, for Kyoto and LA, their routes have similar kilometers, and they also have similar passenger numbers, so I think it's a good idea to group them together. And of these 3 categories, which category is the least important? I think for this table, dates are really not that important. Think about it. What's the purpose of this table? I think its main purpose is to compare the sizes of the 6 networks rather than when they opened. And earlier in the video, I said that for less important data, we can omit it or we can report it less precisely. So I'm not going to say exactly when they opened. I will just say that they were the last 2 of these cities to have their own railway networks. You can also use this to describe London. In details paragraph 1, I used the oldest. London's is the oldest of the systems in the 6 cities. You could also say that London was the first of these cities to have a railway system. And remember, when reporting their routes, instead of pointing out the single smallest number, we can say that they both are the smallest. These 2 networks also have the shortest routes at 11 and 28 kilometers respectively. But be careful that here we need to use the plural routes because here we have 2 routes. And we can do the same for their passenger numbers. Instead of pointing out the single smallest number, we can say that they both are the smallest and are used by the smallest numbers of passengers per year at 45 and 50 million respectively. Again, remember to use the plural numbers because here we have 2 numbers. Finally, Washington, D.C. I will just go ahead and report these 2 numbers and omit its date opened. Compared with the 2 networks mentioned above, the one in Washington, D.C. is relatively long at 126 kilometers and has a relatively large yearly passenger count at 144 million. Here I used the one to refer to the network. You could also say that Washington, D.C. is relatively long. The second network is implied, we can omit it. Here's another example. In details paragraph 1, we have railway systems opened in Paris in 1900 and in Tokyo in 1927. You could also say that the system in Paris opened in 1900 and the one in Tokyo opened in 1927. Or Tokyo's opened in 1927. All 3 are correct. I chose to use this version because it avoids saying opened twice in a short sentence. Also note the use of passenger count. It means number of passengers. So when you want to say number of passengers, you can use passenger count or passenger numbers to vary your language. But be careful that it should be passenger count, singular, but passenger numbers, plural, has relatively large yearly passenger numbers. Here's another example. This slide graph shows the number of tourists visiting a particular island. This slide represents the total number of visitors to the island. You could say that the total number of visitors to the island increased, or the island's total visitor count increased, singular, or the island's total visitor numbers increased, plural. Now let's go back to this table. The overview paragraph, it can be your second or your last paragraph. For this table, I don't think it's a good idea to report only the 3 biggest numbers. Overall, while London's is the oldest and the longest of the systems in the 6 cities, Tokyo's has the highest yearly passenger count. I don't think this is a good overview. This only covers 3 networks. In this table's overview, I think it's better to give a general description of all 6 networks. Overall, the 3 oldest systems in London, Paris, and Tokyo have longer routes and carry many more passengers every year than the 3 in Washington, D.C., Kyoto, and Los Angeles. Finally, the introductory paragraph. This paragraph should be a paraphrase of the original. The table presents data on the underground railway networks in 6 cities. Here's the entire essay. And here are 3 useful tips that we've covered in this video that you can use to group data. First of all, you can group together 2 categories if they share some similarities. Secondly, you could say that something is the single biggest thing. But don't forget that you could also say 2 things, both are the biggest. This tip is extremely useful when there is a lot of data to report. Lastly, for less important data, we could omit it, or we could report it less precisely. We could do this by giving a rough number or giving a range. I don't talk about how to give a range in this video. If you are interested in learning how to give a range for less important numbers, make sure to check out these 2 videos. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye!